The collapse never announces itself. It does not arrive with sirens or official declarations. It begins quietly, an empty shelf where antibiotics once stood, a delayed shipment of fuel, a distribution center running at half capacity because one critical component failed 3 continents away. Before the next supply chain collapse, the real danger is not chaos in the streets. It is the illusion of stability in the final hours before the fracture becomes irreversible. Most people believe collapse looks dramatic. In reality, it looks ordinary until it isn't. Modern civilization runs on synchronized logistics. The global supply chain operates on just-in-time inventory systems engineered to minimize storage costs and maximize turnover efficiency. Warehouses no longer hold months of reserves, they hold days. Retail stores often carry less than 72 hours of high-demand essentials. Fuel stations rely on scheduled tanker deliveries calibrated to predictive consumption algorithms. Pharmacies depend on centralized distributors that assume uninterrupted trucking corridors. This system works with astonishing precision under stable conditions. But precision systems are fragile. When even one node fails, transportation bottlenecks, cyber disruptions, labor shortages, natural disasters, fuel constraints, the ripple moves faster than public awareness. The misunderstanding is that collapse requires a single catastrophic trigger. In reality, it emerges from cascading failure. A port delay reduces available shipping containers. A trucking labor shortage slows distribution. A regional power outage disrupts cold storage. A weather event halts rail movement. Each disruption compounds the next. The hidden science behind this fragility lies in complex adaptive systems theory. Supply chains function as tightly coupled networks. When coupling is tight, efficiency increases but resilience decreases. There is minimal slack, minimal redundancy, minimal buffering. Engineers understand this trade-off intimately. Corporations choose efficiency because in stable times it maximizes profit. In unstable times, it amplifies shock. Evidence of this dynamic has already been documented. During recent global disruptions, grocery inventories dropped within days, not weeks. Hospitals reported shortages of basic personal protective equipment due to overseas manufacturing concentration. Fuel pipelines disrupted by cyber events triggered regional gasoline scarcity within 48 hours. None of these incidents represented total societal collapse. They were stress tests. And each revealed how quickly localized disruption translates into public vulnerability. The survival implication is immediate and uncomfortable. Waiting for official confirmation is already too late. When the public recognizes shortage, supply has already contracted. The forbidden bug-out strategy is not about fleeing dramatically into wilderness terrain with improvised tools and fantasy survivalism. It is about understanding system lag. It is about leaving before movement becomes constrained, because once fuel distribution tightens, highways clog. Once panic buying begins, restocking halts. Once communication networks saturate, coordination fails. Escalation begins when demand spikes irrationally. Behavioral economics shows that perceived scarcity triggers hoarding behavior. Even rumors of disruption can cause exponential purchasing surges. Retailers cannot compensate because upstream production cannot scale instantly. Manufacturing operates on forecast models that assume predictable consumption curves. Panic destroys predictability. That is when the window closes. Transitioning from analysis to action requires abandoning cinematic myths and replacing them with logistical realism. The true bug-out strategy is not about running from danger, it is about outrunning bottlenecks. The first principle is mobility independence. Most individuals assume they can leave at any time, but transportation networks depend on fuel station continuity, functional traffic systems, and law enforcement coordination. When a region experiences supply contraction, vehicle congestion multiplies because everyone decides simultaneously. Traffic engineering models demonstrate that once road density crosses a certain threshold, flow rate collapses nonlinearly. A minor increase in vehicle volume can reduce throughput by more than 50%. This phenomenon is known as traffic phase transition. It turns highways into containment corridors. The misunderstanding is that early departure means overreaction. The hidden science says otherwise. Emergency management agencies use evacuation timing models that prioritize phased departure precisely to prevent gridlock. Those who leave before official orders often move with minimal friction. Those who wait move with millions. Evidence from hurricane evacuations repeatedly shows that departure time strongly predicts survival outcome and stress exposure. The same logic applies to supply chain collapse. Early movers access open fuel stations, clear roads, available lodging, and functioning communications. Survival implications extend beyond transportation. Water infrastructure depends on electrically powered pumping stations. Wastewater treatment requires chemical supplies delivered regularly. Grocery distribution depends on refrigerated trucking. If fuel becomes limited or transportation corridors close, perishables disappear first. Without refrigeration, spoilage accelerates. The escalation phase occurs when perishable shortages lead to broader purchasing of non-perishables, compounding scarcity. The forbidden element of the strategy is not secrecy, it is counterintuitive timing. People assume departure should follow visible crisis. In reality, departure must precede it. But leaving blindly is reckless. The strategy requires metrics. Monitoring freight indices, port congestion data, fuel inventory reports, regional weather disruptions, and trucking capacity statistics provides early signals. These indicators are publicly available, but rarely interpreted by households. Professionals in logistics read them daily. Families do not. That gap creates vulnerability. Transitioning deeper, the next layer involves resource density planning. Traditional survival advice emphasizes stockpiling without mobility planning. That is flawed. Excess accumulation reduces agility. A scientifically grounded approach balances portable supply with pre-identified relocation zones. Rural areas with diversified water sources, local agriculture, and decentralized power generation provide resilience buffers. Urban centers dependent on daily inbound freight do not. The danger intensifies when financial systems react. Supply chain contraction increases commodity prices. Fuel cost rises influence transportation expense, which feeds back into retail pricing. Inflation reduces purchasing power. Consumers accelerate buying in anticipation of further increases. This feedback loop accelerates depletion. Complex systems analysis calls this positive reinforcement. Once activated, it moves rapidly. The misunderstanding here is assuming that government reserves instantly stabilize markets. Strategic reserves exist, but distribution speed matters. Releasing fuel from reserves does not bypass transportation bottlenecks. Deploying emergency supplies requires functional trucking networks. Hidden science reveals that reserves mitigate duration, not immediacy. The first 72 hours remain volatile. Evidence from disaster logistics demonstrates that self-sufficiency for a minimum of 3 to 7 days dramatically reduces mortality and infrastructure strain, yet most households maintain less than 3 days of essential water and food. Water alone presents critical vulnerability. Municipal systems can lose pressure if electricity fails. Without pressure, contamination risk increases due to backflow. Boil advisories follow. But boiling requires fuel. If fuel supply tightens simultaneously, the chain compounds. Survival implications demand layered redundancy. Portable water filtration with verified pathogen reduction ratings. Stored potable water calculated at minimum 1 gallon per person per day. Shelf-stable caloric reserves exceeding 2,000 calories per adult daily. Independent lighting powered by battery banks. Communication redundancy through battery-powered radios. None of this is dramatic. All of it is structural. Escalation reaches psychological thresholds when social trust erodes. Empty shelves create visible signals of instability. Human beings rely on environmental cues. When cues suggest scarcity, cooperation declines. The window for calm relocation narrows further. Transitioning forward requires understanding that collapse is rarely uniform. Some regions stabilize quickly. Others deteriorate faster due to infrastructure fragility. The forbidden bug-out strategy therefore includes geographic intelligence. Identify secondary regions with lower population density, diversified economic activity, accessible freshwater, and multiple transportation routes. Avoid single corridor towns dependent on one highway or rail line. Engineering redundancy is key. If one route closes, alternatives must exist. The danger expands if digital infrastructure falters. Modern logistics depends on cloud-based inventory systems, GPS fleet tracking, and automated warehouse robotics. Cyber disruptions can desynchronize shipments without physical damage. If digital tracking fails, routing errors multiply. Manual override capacity is limited because systems have optimized away redundancy staffing. Evidence from prior cyber incidents shows restoration may take days. Survival implications are clear. Physical maps remain essential. Pre-planned rendezvous points should not rely on cellular data. Cash reserves become temporarily valuable if payment networks experience latency. Fuel tanks should not drop below half capacity during unstable periods. These are not extreme measures, they are continuity measures. Escalation continues when healthcare supply chains constrict. Many pharmaceuticals rely on international active ingredient production. Hospitals maintain limited inventories due to cost constraints. During disruption, elective procedures pause, but chronic conditions remain. Individuals dependent on medication face acute vulnerability. Transitioning responsibly means maintaining extended prescriptions within legal frameworks and rotating supply to prevent expiration. The misunderstanding persists that preparedness signals paranoia. In engineering disciplines, redundancy signals professionalism. Aircraft carry backup systems not because failure is expected, but because consequences are unacceptable. Supply chain collapse operates on similar principles. Probability may be low in any given month. Impact is high when it occurs. Hidden science also reveals that decentralized systems outperform centralized ones under stress. Community agriculture, local manufacturing, distributed energy microgrids, and regional warehousing provide buffers. Evidence from regions with localized food production shows shorter recovery timelines after transport disruption. Survival implications demand skill acquisition alongside material preparation. Understanding basic water purification chemistry, food preservation through dehydration or canning, safe fuel storage limits, and situational awareness training transforms equipment into capability. Escalation without skill leads to misuse and risk. As the system tightens, time compresses. Delays shorten decision windows. The transition point approaches when news headlines acknowledge shortages. By then, supply contraction is already embedded. The final lesson before moving deeper is simple. Preparedness is not reaction, it is anticipation guided by data. And the forbidden bug-out strategy is not about fleeing society, it is about positioning ahead of bottlenecks, using science instead of fear, and moving before the collapse becomes visible. When the first distribution centers begin operating below threshold capacity, the danger shifts from inconvenience to structural instability. A warehouse functioning at 70% does not simply move fewer goods, it disrupts synchronized delivery cycles that retailers depend on. Automated systems calculate outbound shipments based on predictive demand models. When inbound freight slows, algorithms attempt compensation by reallocating from other regions. That redistribution creates secondary shortages. What appears localized becomes network-wide. The public often sees only the final symptom, an empty aisle, without recognizing the upstream fracture propagating silently through freight corridors, rail interchanges, and port terminals. Analysis of prior disruptions shows that supply chains fail asymmetrically. Essential goods do not disappear evenly. High-volume staples vanish first because turnover rates are highest. Milk, bread, bottled water, fuel, and prescription medications move through systems faster than luxury items. When throughput declines, high-frequency goods exhaust inventory within hours. This pattern creates psychological shock because consumers interpret the absence of essentials as systemic failure. The misunderstanding is assuming restocking will occur overnight. In tightly coupled systems, replenishment depends on upstream stability that may no longer exist. The hidden science behind rapid depletion lies in inventory velocity. Retail operations track days of supply, often maintaining only 3 to 5 days of high-demand products. Warehouses operate on cross-stocking principles, minimizing long-term storage. When inbound shipments slow by even 20%, downstream retail empties within 72 hours. Evidence from hurricane-prone regions demonstrates that once panic purchasing begins, restocking timelines extend from days to weeks. Transportation assets cannot instantly multiply. Truck drivers are finite, fuel is finite, loading docks are finite. Survival implications become severe when critical infrastructure relies on the same freight networks as consumer goods. Power plants require continuous fuel delivery, particularly natural gas and coal facilities dependent on rail. Water treatment plants rely on chemical shipments such as chlorine and alum. Hospitals depend on oxygen cylinder logistics and sterile supply chains. A supply chain contraction therefore threatens not only grocery shelves but life-sustaining systems. Escalation occurs when industrial demand competes with civilian demand for limited transportation capacity. Prioritization decisions are made rapidly, often diverting resources away from retail distribution. Transitioning from observation to tactical planning requires abandoning reactive thinking. The forbidden bug-out strategy at this stage involves pre-positioning rather than last-minute escape. Relocation zones must be supplied before public awareness triggers congestion. Transportation science shows that evacuation efficiency decreases exponentially once road occupancy surpasses critical density. Even minor accidents can halt multi-lane highways for hours. Fuel burn increases during stop-and-go traffic, accelerating shortages at already strained gas stations. Evidence from mass evacuations indicates that vehicles stranded without fuel often exceed projections because drivers underestimate consumption during gridlock. The misunderstanding persists that rural relocation guarantees safety. Rural areas dependent on single trucking routes or limited medical infrastructure can become isolated rapidly. The hidden science emphasizes node diversity. Regions with multiple access highways, nearby rail spurs, independent wells, agricultural land, and distributed power sources exhibit higher resilience. Evidence from disaster recovery data shows that communities with local food production recover faster because dependency chains are shorter. Survival implications demand granular preparation. Water security becomes primary. Municipal systems rely on electrically powered pumps maintaining pressure gradients. If power fluctuates, backflow contamination can introduce pathogens into distribution lines. Boil advisories follow, but boiling requires energy. Without stable electricity or gas, households without alternative heating methods face compounded risk. Portable filtration systems rated for bacteria and protozoa combined with chemical disinfection capability provide redundancy. Stored water must account for drinking, sanitation, and minimal hygiene. Escalation occurs when sanitation declines, increasing disease transmission risk within dense communities. Transitioning further, consider fuel dynamics. Fuel stations operate on underground storage replenished by tanker trucks scheduled precisely. Most stations carry only a few days of supply under normal consumption rates. Panic purchasing drains reserves in hours. Refineries cannot accelerate output instantly due to safety constraints and feedstock limitations. Pipeline networks operate at fixed throughput capacities. A single refinery outage can ripple across multiple states. Evidence from prior pipeline shutdowns demonstrates regional fuel shortages within 48 hours, even when national supply remains adequate. The bottleneck is distribution, not production. The misunderstanding is assuming alternative transportation, like public transit, will compensate. Public transit systems themselves depend on diesel supply and electrical grid stability. In supply contraction scenarios, transit frequency often decreases due to budget constraints or fuel rationing. The hidden science of energy density reveals why fuel remains central. Liquid hydrocarbons store immense energy in compact form, enabling long-range mobility. When access to that density declines, movement radius shrinks dramatically. Survival implications therefore require maintaining vehicle readiness, understanding safe fuel storage limits, and planning relocation distances within realistic fuel range parameters. Escalation intensifies when communication networks strain. Cellular systems depend on backup batteries and generators at tower sites. These backups typically sustain operations for limited hours unless refueled. If transportation networks are constrained, refueling towers becomes difficult. Network congestion during crisis further degrades service. Evidence from large-scale emergencies shows that text messaging often functions when voice calls fail due to lower bandwidth requirements. The hidden science of network prioritization explains this resilience. However, prolonged outages still occur. Survival implications include communication redundancy. Battery-powered radios capable of receiving emergency broadcasts operate independently of cellular infrastructure. Pre-arranged meeting points reduce reliance on real-time coordination. Escalation emerges when misinformation spreads faster than verified updates. Behavioral psychology demonstrates that uncertainty amplifies fear, driving impulsive decisions that clog infrastructure further. Transitioning to food systems, consider refrigeration dependence. Modern food distribution relies on cold chain logistics. If power interruptions occur at warehouses or retail locations, spoilage accelerates. Losses reduce available supply even if upstream production remains intact. The misunderstanding is believing that agricultural abundance guarantees food access. Production does not equal distribution. Hidden science within thermodynamics reveals that perishable foods require continuous temperature control. A single prolonged outage can invalidate tons of inventory. Evidence from storm-related outages shows supermarkets discarding entire freezer sections after extended power loss. Survival implications emphasize shelf-stable reserves and knowledge of safe food storage temperatures. Escalation becomes evident when refrigerated pharmaceuticals, including insulin, face temperature excursions. Medical vulnerability compounds supply fragility. Transitioning deeper into structural resilience, financial systems must be considered. Electronic payment networks require operational servers, telecommunications, and power. Even short outages can disrupt transactions. During uncertainty, individuals withdraw cash, straining banking liquidity. Evidence from disaster zones reveals temporary cash-only commerce when digital networks fail. The hidden science of fractional reserve banking explains why rapid withdrawals create visible strain even if institutions remain solvent. Survival implications include maintaining modest physical currency reserves for short-term transactions. Escalation broadens when labor availability declines. Supply chains depend not only on infrastructure but on human operators. Illness outbreaks, transportation barriers, or safety concerns reduce workforce participation. A warehouse missing 30% of staff cannot maintain throughput even if inventory exists. Evidence from pandemic-era disruptions demonstrated how absenteeism slowed port unloading, trucking schedules, and manufacturing output. The misunderstanding is attributing shortage solely to material scarcity rather than labor dynamics. The hidden science of throughput capacity clarifies that every node has a maximum processing rate. When staffing falls, capacity shrinks. Backlogs accumulate. Recovery takes longer than the disruption because clearing backlog requires excess capacity that may not exist. Survival implications underscore timing once more. Early relocation avoids exposure to prolonged recovery timelines. Transitioning toward escalation's psychological dimension, observe consumer confidence metrics. When public confidence declines sharply, spending patterns change. Households prioritize essentials, reducing discretionary purchases. Businesses facing revenue loss cut staffing, further slowing economic activity. This feedback loop magnifies instability. Evidence from economic downturns shows how sentiment alone can accelerate contraction even before material shortages become widespread. The forbidden bug-out strategy recognizes that collapse is often a process, not a singular event. It unfolds in waves. Initial shortages stabilize, then secondary effects emerge. The window for smooth mobility exists primarily in the early phase before behavioral amplification overwhelms infrastructure. Waiting for clarity eliminates advantage. Escalation becomes visible when official advisories encourage conservation, fuel conservation, water conservation, energy conservation. These advisories signal systemic strain. Transitioning at that moment may already be marginally late, but still possible if preparation preceded it. Those without preparation enter reactive mode, competing for limited resources. The survival implication at this stage is strategic patience combined with decisive execution, monitoring objective indicators, maintaining readiness, and acting before saturation defines the difference between controlled relocation and forced stagnation. The science is not dramatic, it is logistical, behavioral, and infrastructural, and as contraction deepens, the margin for error narrows further.